Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. After the last few years of struggle, anger and purging prompted by the Me Too movement, the time has come, says today's guest, for a new narrative that embraces sexual diversity, freedom and autonomy. Redefining sex and love as a constructive, harmonizing experience is a crucial part of how we move forward as a human collective. Dr. Kelly Neff is a social psychologist, author, professor, futurist and talk radio personality who's electrified the transformational media world with her unique focus on the intersection of psychology, consciousness and human sexuality. An academically trained research psychologist, she spent almost a decade teaching thousands of people in her online and in-person Psychology of Human Sexuality courses at Saddleback College, California. Dr. Kelly Neff joins me today to talk about her new book, Sex Positive, Redefining Our Attitudes to Love and Sex, which epitomizes her desire to empower sexual freedom, inspire healing, and improve people's relationships by fusing cutting-edge scientific findings with Eastern philosophies and her own deeply personal insights. Dr. Kelly Neff, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sandie. It's a pleasure to be here today.
It's good to have you. And what a fascinating book it is, and how deep and broad and really thorough your research was. So congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you so much. This book has been many, many years in the making, and it feels good to get it done.
You know, it's a subject that's been many, many years in the making too, hasn't it?
Yes.
And really in the unmaking as well.
Yes, absolutely. We're seeing things that we never thought could happen as far as like the disintegration of categories, just the changes in the way people understand their sexuality and define it. It's been quite incredible, kind of like a new revolution.
Yeah, and when you think, you know, it's only, 120 years ago that we had all of the Victorian strictures and constraints and, the conditioning that came down to, certainly to my generation from that. But let me start at the beginning of your book, because, I mean, you know, it does epitomize your desire to empower sexual freedom and inspire healing. And you're very honest and frank about your own experiences. You write in the very beginning about having been slut-shamed at school. Was that experience the catalyst for you becoming a millennial disruptor with a big desire to empower sexual freedom, or did that come later?
I think in a roundabout way it was, but at the time that I was going through that, it wasn't so much of an idea of I'm gonna fix this, you know. It was more that happened. I realized, like, as a bisexual, very free-spirited woman growing up in the 90s, that it wasn't okay to express that, at least not in America. And I kind of, rather than, you know, becoming the champion, I internalized a lot of the pain and frustration that I felt. And I thought, maybe society's right and there is something wrong with me. And from there, I kind of like shut myself off sexually for a long time. And it made me very ill. It made me physically ill. My uterus actually got sick. And I believe, and I can't prove it, but I believe in a metaphysical Louise Hay kind of sense.
Yes.
All of that repressed energy really did affect my body, and it manifested in the physical, and it made my life hell. You know, I had multiple surgeries, and then finally around the age of 30, I ended up in emergency surgery, and the uterus had to come out, and I almost died. And I kind of awoke in a new timeline and a new version of life. And nobody could explain to me what had happened. There was no explanation for why I had all these tumors inside of me, And I think something clicked in my head, and that's when I decided, okay, this is real, and I now do want to reclaim this empowerment and autonomy over my sexuality, because it almost maybe cost me my life.
I think we know now that our thoughts and our emotions affect our physical health. Nothing is separate. And reading your book and reading about, these incredible number of tumours that you had in your uterus and all of the problems that you had, I drew the same conclusion. When we shut down parts of ourselves, when we are trained, conditioned to believe that parts of ourselves are shameful, or we neglect them in some way, I think it does make a difference to our health.
I really believe so. And there's so much evidence of this, too, across different fields of the sciences and metaphysics. And I think that's why I decided, I didn't want anybody else to go through this. And if I could share this story, as hard as it was to share this story, by doing that, maybe I could inspire other people that they don't have to feel ashamed. They don't have to repress their sexuality. They can reclaim and take ownership and be sex positive.
Now, you describe the sex positive movement as a social, political, and philosophical movement that promotes and embraces sexuality and sexual expression with an emphasis on safe and consensual sex. Can you explain to me what a sex positive relationship looks like?
Yes, absolutely. When you are in a sex positive relationship, you can be whoever you want to be sexually and do whatever you want to do so long as there is consent involved without feeling judged, shamed, guilted, slut-shamed. This is a relationship where partners really support each other's decision-making and choices rather than questioning it. And it's something that, again, it takes people a long time to get here. I know so many people, and I've worked with so many, who they get into a relationship and then their partner is very judging and controlling over their sexuality. That is not a sex-positive relationship. If you want to experiment, if you want to try something new, if what your partner is doing in the bedroom isn't giving you the type of orgasm you're looking for, you need to know that you can communicate that in a safe place without being judged for it.
Well, many people, especially women, are brought up to believe that they don't have the right. They don't have the right to demand or to ask or to complain about anything. And this is the sadness of how over the millennia, the true purpose of sex, what I believe the true, sacred union, has been so compromised and so corrupted, and it's been corrupted for men as well as for women.
Yes, very much so. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I think we've all been kind of buried under these Victorian era and, kind of post-Christianity stereotypes about the genders and what they should expect, almost to the point of, men shouldn't even want commitment. All men want to do is have one-night stands, right? And if a man has commitment, wants commitment, or if a woman wants a one-night stand, it violates the stereotype. At least that was the narrative. Growing up with Cosmopolitan magazine, for example, in the 90s, it was always how to, lock in your men and sex tricks to keep him around, because it's basically society telling us he's going to leave you. You're not worthy if you don't do some really amazing things. Of course, I think now we're starting to realize what a load of BS all of that was.
Yes. I wrote a book back in the 90s, which had a lot of publicity in England, called Sex, Lies and Love, How to Understand the Opposite Sex. And the only reason it didn't make it into America was because John Gray brought out Men Are From Mars at the same time, and it eclipsed mine. But in that book, I interviewed a lot of men and women, and reading your book was so fascinating because I could track back to the answers that I was getting then. And I had a chapter called Hookers, Whores and One Night Stands, which was trying to explain to women, who saw all of those things as a massive threat to their relationships, that it wasn't a threat at all. And it's so interesting reading your book because so much has changed since then. And at the same time, so little has changed.
Exactly. It is. Well, and, when we're talking about culture and society, and trends, I mean, we're talking about millions, billions of people all living in different places around the world. So they're going to experience things in different ways, right? So there's no one right way of looking at any of this. I'm trying to look at kind of, like you were saying, like the trends of where it's going and where it's been.
Yes.
And from where it's going, it's interesting because I do believe we are now realizing that we don't need to be in a relationship. Like Emma Watson recently saying she's self-partnered. I love that. That was fabulous to me.
Yes.
We're realizing that women, your self-esteem and your worth is not Disney. It's not you have to have a man or you're nothing and the whole goal of your life should be getting married and having kids. I think that is really starting to fall by the wayside. And certainly for me, I can't have kids, so but I don't feel any less of a woman, right? It's just that the roles of society are starting to crumble and they're being replaced with something that is much more fluid.
And that interests me, that we seem to have, the pendulum has swung so far in opposite directions over the last few millennia. And now, fluidity is not something that I certainly would have even thought about. I mean, yes, of course, we understood, when I was growing up and when I was writing my book about transsexuals, as we called it then, and homosexuals, I ghosted the autobiography of Britain's most famous transgender person at the time. But there was no other, and bisexual, but there was no other kind of fluidity in there. And it really interests me today how the young are rejecting all of the stereotypes and saying, don't peg us down. We can be anything we want to be. And I love the idea that, they're saying love is love is love. It doesn't matter as long as it's love.
Very much so. And identity is identity. And I think when we're talking about fluidity, the queer culture, non-binary, non-cisgender. So when we say cisgender means you demonstrate your gender identity as either masculine or feminine. This is a topic that has led to so much confusion. Even, I've been teaching it for many years, and I think now is different even when I started teaching it back in the early 2000s. But essentially what we're seeing is people not identifying as male or female when it comes to how they want to be perceived socially. And your gender identity is your psychology of how masculine or feminine you feel and how you want it to be perceived by the world. So it has nothing to do with your biological, physical anatomy. It's a social construct. And what we're seeing now is this social construct being flipped on its head and saying, great, well, since this is a social construct and it's my psychology about my identity, I don't want to be exclusively male or exclusively female. Maybe I want to be something completely different. Maybe I want to pick certain parts of each one. Maybe I'm a combination of a bunch of genders. I mean, the possibilities here are endless and they keep changing. So who knows kind of where it's going to go. But I personally am a big fan of this idea. And it's hard to say whether this is a form of resistance against all of the stereotypes about a woman is this, a man is this. Oh, it is in part a political, social act. And then it also has to do with people's true feelings that they're able to express. Finally, now they're allowed to even talk about this. I mean, when I was growing up, being gay was a huge deal, and we had Matthew Shepard and gay people being killed for being gay. And now it's happening to trans people. And it's been happening to trans people, but trans visibility is now becoming a major movement, and we can thank a lot of popular culture, too, for pushing this into the mainstream and giving people a voice and visibility that they've never had before.
And yet in so many countries, the hard line seems to be getting harder. And, it's interesting that you've got both ends of the spectrum. In the West, you've got a lot of... what's the word? There's a lot more I think, compassion and acceptance and inclusion. But in other countries, it seems to be that people are clamping down and, women are being even more repressed. Children are being repressed. You look at the sex trafficking. The whole underbelly of it seems to be becoming more pronounced, as if, we've got this push me, pull you going on.
It is. Well, they say, the capacity for light is only equal and equivalent to the capacity for dark in all of us. And I just wonder if we can look at the Earth and our society as a whole through the same lens. As the awakening is happening, so too does the shift to darkness happen to balance it out.
Yeah. Carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say it's not the most uplifting thing to think about, but it does make you wonder, at what point is this also just like the tiger in the corner in the cage lashing out, right before we finally take it down. That's how I want to see it.
Yeah, it's like the last gasp.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is. It doesn't seem like the sexual awakening is spreading and growing and pushing forward quite fast if you think about it.
Yeah. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is social psychologist, author, professor, and futurist Dr. Kelly Neff, whose latest book, Sex Positive, combines cutting-edge scientific findings with Eastern philosophies and her own deeply personal insights to redefine our attitudes to love and sex. Still to come, the rise of non-monogamous relationships, the pitfalls of online dating, gender fluidity, female orgasm, robotic sex partners, and other contentious issues emerging as part of the massive, ongoing social and political shifts surrounding sex, love, and identity. We'll be back with more from Dr. Kelly Neff after this break.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
I'm Fidel Nsombo. I was born in a city called Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America and all your problems are done, they don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Dr. Kelly Neff, are you familiar with the Tamera Peace Research Village in Portugal?
Yes, absolutely. Basically, it's the idea of founding a kind of intentional community that embraces free love, not really free love though, but unity and kind of sharing, building love, that kind of thing. I'm sure you're familiar with it though, Sandie.
Yeah, transparency. One of the filmmakers, Ian Mackenzie, said that the liberation of Eros is the political revolution of our time, which I thought summed it up really well. And when we think about, Wilhelm Reich said that, if you really want to suppress people, if you want to create an authoritarian regime, then you start with sexual oppression. And what Tamera stands for is that, they see Eros as the energetic field of love that exists between all of life. and that reconnection with this life principle is the key to change the system of oppression and of repression, and the system of freedom. And I find that so fascinating in light of your book, because, I mean, this is exactly what seems to be happening now and what you're showing us. What, in researching your book, I mean, you are a psychologist. You teach, sexuality and many of the things that you write about in your book. So I would imagine that not much surprises you these days. But in researching this book, was there anything in particular that got you excited or really surprised and looking forward to seeing what comes next?
It's funny you say that, because you're right. I have almost no filter and nothing surprises me. However, there were tons of things in this book that surprised me, that got me excited, that confused me, that scared me. And I think you can, when you did the outro for the last segment and you were like, robotic sex robots, polyamorous relationship, but whatever you said, like it sounded really lit. And I was like, wow, that's all in this book. Certainly, there's a couple things, and most of them have to do with technology. And in particular, the robotic sex partner thing, I got so deep into that, I kind of found myself in the sex robot hole for a while, and it's all I could think about and talk about. And my friends and family were like, dude, we don't care. But I mean, the findings are incredible. The Pew Research Center said that by 2025, we might be marrying our highly intelligent sex robots.
That part of it really did make me feel, and I am from a different generation, I'll confess, but, with my background at Forum, I've always been very open-minded. But, robotic sex partners, isn't that, and marrying them, taking it a bit too far? I mean, where is the love in that? Where's the joy in the union? Where's the transcendent spiritual experience?
Oh, it's very transhumanistic, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
In addition to, potentially forming these relationships with these sex robots, we are also potentially going down a road of kind of transhumanistic biohacking, where we also become the robots a little bit. And I know it sounds super sci-fi, but these ideas of genital implants, enhancements, I mean, we're already 3D printing organs. So, is it entirely hard to believe that a man might get an implant in his crotch that makes his penis turn into a vibrator when he's having sex with a woman? I mean, it's not that far off. So what we're seeing is this weird, sci-fi transcendence where we're becoming more than human, but are we also then becoming less than human?
Well, exactly. It's very mechanistic, isn't it, the whole idea? I mean, and when you read in your book that adults today are having less sex than adults did 30 years ago, one has to wonder, well, what's going on here?
Oh my gosh, what's going on?
Yes.
I think really it comes down to this digital revolution. So for me, I'm a Zennial, which is the sub-generation of people born between 1977 and 1983. We're kind of in between the Generation X and the millennials. But what makes us unique is that we have spent, for me, I was born in 82, literally spent half of my life without technology and then half of my life with it. So I feel like I'm in this weird little pocket where I've seen everything change. Everything. And one of the ways that this has changed is that now millennials and Gen Z, they are having less sex with partners than their boomer parents did about 30 years ago, a little bit less, but they're having more types of different sex. So they're masturbating much more. They're realizing they don't need another person there to get them off because of pornography. And pornography, self-stimulation, self-pleasuring, masturbation, it has become so much more acceptable than it ever has been before because this generation is realizing it's normalized for them. It's not a big deal. And then you add this. Oh, yes.
No, I was going to say, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about how many of the younger generation are having their relationships through their telephones. You know, they'll communicate with people. They don't speak to people anymore. Is this part of the same trend?
Absolutely, absolutely. The DMing, the snapping, sending nudes, sexting, absolutely. And again, it's a double-edged sword because we are more connected than ever, but we're also more isolated when it comes to real human contact and relationships. And with that online communication comes a whole slew of other problems, aka treating each other like crap because there's no accountability when you're communicating with strangers on the internet. So ghosting and curving and taunting and, you know, just kind of discarding people when you don't want them without an example. Or cuffing is when you just look for someone to be with for the holidays in person because you don't want to be alone, and then you uncuff as soon as it gets warm again and it's time to go flirt. Like, we're becoming, it's hard to say if humans were always crappy to each other when it comes to love and dating, or if it's being magnified and amplified now because the media that we're using is just leans itself towards that type of communication.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, is this just a phase on the way to something else? You know, we don't know that. Only history will tell us. But, you know, how has the idea of being spiritual but not religious, which seems to be, you know, what many of the young claim to be, become part of their approach to sexuality?
That's another really great question, and that's why, like I said, there is a duality and a balance to things. Because on the one hand, you know, like we said, there's porn and we want robot sex and sex dolls and we don't want to connect. But then on the other side, we're also desperate for a deeper connection. And you just look at like the popularity of, you know, yoga retreats that people will go on their bachelorette parties for instead of going to get drunk. You know, they'll go, we are leaning towards a holistic model of life, and we're searching for it because we're under a lot of stress, we're under a lot of pressure for perfectionism, especially this generation, and we are looking for a way to balance because all the medication that we're being prescribed, a lot of it doesn't work, right? So the reason I believe that we are becoming more spiritual but not religious and integrating that into our sexuality is because we know there is an unconscious, deeper knowledge within us about the importance of sacred union and the importance of sexuality, not just for physical pleasure, but also for our creativity and enhancing our lives, that this is a gift and it's here for our own wellness. And I feel like in times of immense change and struggle, we somehow find ourselves called back to our true essence.
Well, so here we have this dichotomy going on. We've got, you know, the younger generation, robotic sex, you know, self-sex, hooking up, not having deep relationships, and yet at the same time, we've got this whole other movement, you know, looking within, finding that, you know, spiritual wholeness. You know, how do they reconcile that?
You know, I have to say, like, I've been there too. I feel like you can have both. Sometimes you want to avoid because your energy is just too intense, or you're feeling too empathetic, or the energy of the world is too much and you don't want to connect. And then other times you feel very open about wanting to pursue something that's a lot deeper. It takes courage. You know, like when we're talking about, say, Tantra or Taoism or even the White Tigress tradition or the Kwadoshka traditions, these are all spiritual traditions that are suddenly getting, to use the Reddit term, they're getting upvoted in terms of our cultural consciousness, and people are reading the books and talking about them. But it can be scary. You know, I just did a show on tantric sex last week with Dr. Jeffrey Talltrees and Somaj Pokras, and they're like experts. They're an older couple. They've been married for years. They do tantric sex all the time in tantric sex workshops. And one of my questions was, for our generation, my generation, how do you make sure your partner is actually down for this? Because it can be very intense. And we kind of shun any level of intense connection, but yet we want it. Yes. And this is the ambivalence. You're absolutely right.
Well, what about love? I mean, Where does love come into it? You know, are the young not interested in love? Are they afraid of love? Do they feel that they're too young for love? That comes later.
It's a very good question. I think the metrics that measure love have shifted. And, you know, when we look at the sex robot thing, that was one of my biggest concerns, is that if you can be married to a sex robot that you can just turn off, that's been programmed for your pleasure, what does that mean about love? Are we afraid to get down and dirty and make sacrifices? And because love is hard work, you know, being in love, it's not all, you know, turtle doves and fairies and roses. There is compromise, there is honesty, there is truth. There are these things that you have to engage in to be in love. You have to be vulnerable. And yet, some of us want that. Some of us want that so much, in fact, that we will find ourselves, like I have been in the past, in multiple loving relationships at the same time. And, you know, going back to what you were saying about Tamara at the start, this is really, this is the most, it's like a Buddhist non-attachment kind of sacrifice, that you can be in love with someone and then they can also be in love with someone else. And letting go of that control is very much like the liberation of Eros. So, I mean, I don't know if that answered your question, but I think we're all over the place. I think some of us are terrified, and some of us are very open, and we're all at different parts on our journeys. And I'm not here to shade anyone for where they are on their journey. And I think it's very important, and I talked about this a lot in the book, about not pathologizing anybody for their sexual preferences, so long as it's not hurting them or someone else without consent, because that's what sex positive is. We respect other people's right to choose, regardless as to what they want. If they want to be celibate, if they want to have sex with a robot, if they want to have 5 partners, as long as there is consent going on, then part of being sex positive, like, we don't judge them. And I know it goes against our very human nature sometimes to not judge, but that's the goal of this.
So somewhere within there, you know, I'm getting a visual of like a pinball machine, and that's perfectly fine, you know, to be bouncing all over the place and trying it all out. I can understand that, absolutely, and you know, but I do wonder, is there a, you know, where do the genders lie? I mean, do we find that this is more prevalent in those that identify as male than those that identify as female? Do we have any statistics there?
That is a very good question, and I can't really answer that question, partially because even the genders are bouncing around like a pinball machine.
Yeah.
You know, amongst Generation Z, I think as many as 30 to 40% say that they may identify with a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth. So if the people themselves don't even know what their gender is or will be, it's getting harder and harder to get information on how they feel and how they land on certain topics.
Yes, yeah, because it's changing.
This will regulate. I do think this will all regulate. It's an interesting time to be alive. We're in the middle of a massive shift, you know, and it's hard to predict. I'm a futurist, but it's very hard to predict where this is all going to go.
Yeah, well, I don't think we could have predicted where it is 20 years ago, could we?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
and since every structure has to crumble, then why not this one too? You know, I'm all for that. What about soulmates? I mean, where does that come in? Does the younger generation, do they believe in soulmates, or do they think that's just, you know, woo-woo stuff?
One of the things, so I've done, a lot of my research has actually been done at transformational festivals and events. And I don't know if you guys have something like that in the UK, but it's like Glastonbury, but more spiritual and smaller. You know, it still has a lot of like the psychedelics and the music and the partying, but it also has lots of workshops designed to help people kind of push through and push out of where they are and kind of expand. And I love doing events at places like these because people are already in that state of mind of like being in this community, and they're already pushed out a little bit. So it's my favorite place. Do you have stuff like that in the UK?
I am not aware of it, but then again, I am not part of that generation. And, you know, the British way is to keep it very quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is one of those places where people can just let it out.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of workshops about, all of these topics, really. I've done a sex robot one. I've done a polyamorous one. I've done like a sex positive, sexual empowerment one, sexual consciousness. And one of the questions I always get asked is, how do I find my soulmate? And I laugh because, not because it's a stupid question, but because I can't tell if it's coming from our programming or if it's coming from some deep soul need. So when I say that, what I mean is we've been programmed, and we can thank like the Disney movies, and everything else that has told us there's your one true love out there. Mm-hmm. And only if your one true love kisses you will you wake up from your poison apple slumber or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the idea of a soulmate, this idea of this one person, is that where it's coming from, or is it from like the more spiritual esoteric traditions where we talk about twin flames, soulmates, mm-hmm. soul family groups? And most of the time when I do speak to my participants in these workshops, they're talking about the latter. They're talking about kind of their soul group, their soul family. They believe in reincarnation. They want to know when they're going to find their people and how to recognize it. And I think that's really cool and interesting. And, I think we all want to believe that we're part of something. We're part of a family that's reincarnating and looking after us. And, I can't say for certain that I can prove any of this or that I've even experienced it myself, but I do believe that people are actually very interested in this topic because they're looking for that understanding. Everybody feels kind of isolated right now, and we talked about why. So that idea of that deep connection coming back and grounding them, I think, is very appealing.
It's interesting that how much change technology has driven. Technology is changing our lives in ways we could never possibly have imagined. And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
In the true Buddhist sense, like, we can't apply a value judgment to it because it is what it is, and it's happening. There are obviously beneficial and harmful components for people. I think one of the most harmful and incredibly overlooked things is how bad online dating is for people's self-esteem and mental health. That's one of the ones that shocked me when I don't know if you saw in the book.
Yes.
There's a study published, I believe it was in 2017, in the journal Body Image, and it was a survey of nearly over 1,000 college students in the U.S. And they found that regardless of their gender, people who were on Tinder scored significantly lower on measures of self-worth than people who weren't on Tinder, which included measures like body satisfaction, self-esteem, body shame, internalization of cultural beauty standards, and I think self-objectification. In other words, Tinder is bad for your self-esteem. Now, obviously, we could look at those findings and say, well, maybe people with low self-esteem are going on Tinder to begin with, right? A correlation, not causation, we say in social psych. But then when they looked at the studies, the data a little further, they found that men, in particular, had the lowest self-esteem, even lower than females. And when you think about the explanation, it actually starts to make sense that it might be the use of Tinder itself causing, and here's why. What they found is that there's more men than women on Tinder, right? Mm-hmm. And these men, the way that men do stuff is, there's some gender differences in our behavior. Men tend to adopt the kind of throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Okay, so they're throwing out. So they might ask, they might try to match with 20 women in 1 hour, and if they get rejected by all of them, that is more social rejection than, asking one girl out at the bar. Suddenly you've been rejected by 20. In the same time, you would have been rejected by one. And that level of social rejection, research has shown it is akin to physical pain. Like, our brain can't tell the difference between a broken bone and a broken heart. We hurt when we get socially rejected. So what they think is happening, basically, is that men are going all out trying to match with as many girls as possible, getting rejected, and then it's, like, deeply hurting them. And then they keep doing it, hoping that they'll get something that will repair their self-esteem, and it's this, like, very sad, vicious cycle. So in this sense, technology, I believe, is harmful because this is damaging to people's mental health.
Yes. Yeah, that is the big danger. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with author Dr. Kelly Neff about her book, Sex Positive, Redefining Our Attitudes to Love and Sex, which explores the future of love and sexual relationships in the wake of the digital age. We'll be back with more from Dr. Kelly Neff after the break.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Dr. Kelly Neff, I'm going to read a little piece from your book. You say that you believe the future is sex positive, tolerant of individual choice and open to sexual freedom and exploration, where sexual sovereignty is the cornerstone for all genders and the foundation for building understanding, respect, compassion and strength, and that what we're looking for is a world where physical or psychological oppression is no more, a world of the future where Me Too and Time's Up are no longer necessary to give voice to our pain and trauma because we've healed and progressed to a space where all people's sexual sovereignty is respected. Do you really think we can get there?
I mean, I have to believe we can. If you just look at the last 20 years and how much things have changed with bringing these issues into the spotlight, I mean, we could look at this on a scale of, the last 2,000 years and say the last 20, 30 years have been an exponential time of growth. So, yeah, I believe it's possible.
Well, I hope you're right. What can we learn from the ancient sexual wisdom traditions about living a sex-positive life now?
I mean, that's the thing. There is a lot there, and it's so old, it's so ancient, and it kind of predates Christianity, which kind of came in and swooped up and started to control our sexuality. But before that, if we look at, say, Taoism, Tantra, the Native American tradition of Kadoshka, all of these traditions viewed sex as medicine. The importance of balancing the masculine and feminine energies inside of each of us as something extremely beneficial to our health and our longevity.
In a recent interview you did, I'm trying to just find my notes about it. It was with, I was looking at your website. You have a radio show that's very popular. You conducted an interview with Dr. Sider, Desolé? Yeah. And you talked about sexual empowerment and reclaiming sexual sovereignty. And I think Dr. Desolé said, do you realise that in no country in the world, not even the United Nations Human Rights Charter, is there any stipulation that women have the rights to their own bodies? I mean, that just astounded me. Is there anything anywhere that says men have the rights to theirs?
I don't think so. I mean, I think she makes a fantastic point that autonomy over your sexuality and your body is of utmost importance. I think that for men, no one felt it was necessary. Women are the ones who've been traditionally traded and sold and treated like property. Not men. Men have been the ones doing that. So it would make sense that we would need a human rights charter for women because it's still going on in parts of the world.
Oh, yes. I mean, I was just astonished looking at some of the statistics today. Sex trafficking, child trafficking. I mean, just, sexual slavery. Just all of it is just... It's so eye-opening. It's hard to get your jaw off the floor.
Quite overwhelming.
It is. And I do wonder, even if there was a United Nations Human Rights Charter, whether it would make any difference.
I just want people to know that this future is possible. I think that we have to dream big and we have to manifest and we have to put energy into building the future we want. And this is happening across every area right now in our world. I mean, look at the climate change marches and protests and Greta and everything that's happening right now. So, some people might look at what Greta's doing and say, like, oh, it'll never happen. But, I mean, you have to try. You have to put that voice out there. And it's audacious of me to even say that when I hear you read it back. But it has to be said. If I don't say it, then surely I can't live in that world. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I can't help wondering what the reaction would be, what kind of questions people would ask if you were a man having written this book.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. I know. I do wonder as well, and especially because I talk about, toxic masculinity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which toxic masculinity hurts men, too.
Absolutely.
It is a very small percentage of men who are creating, I believe, a lot of the hurt and the pain from toxic masculinity. There are so many men, and I love men, I love women, I love people. There's so many men out there who are fighting toxic masculinity and incredible supporters of women and non-binary people. And it's just not fair to assume all men are toxic. And I just really want to make that clear. Now, if I was a man saying that, maybe it wouldn't be received in quite the same way.
Yeah. And, I think I've had an interview with a man on this show who was talking about toxic masculinity and really how we can train our sons to do it in a different way. And it was fascinating. And he is a sex therapist as well as a family counsellor. But he had some fascinating advice to offer. You write about women having begun to reclaim and redefine the very nature of orgasm. Why is reclaiming or redefining the female orgasm necessary or important to sex positivity?
Very good question. And I think part of the issue here is that sexology has traditionally viewed the female orgasm and female sexual desire and stimulation in general as male sexual arousal light. And that's what Emily Nagoski calls it in her book, Come As You Are, which came out in 2015. It's my inspiration for a lot of my content about orgasm because it's absolutely fantastic. And she's a sex researcher and a sexologist, and she talks about how we have always assumed that if it gets the men off and makes babies, right, so vaginal penetration, vaginal intercourse, that this must be what also should get women off. Should. Again, it's a value judgment. So then, most women, I think it's up to like 90% of women, prefer to orgasm or need to use clitoral stimulation to orgasm. And so that's why reclaiming the orgasm is important, because this value judgment that somehow a vaginal orgasm is better or more superior, or it's insulting or wrong to use your clitoris during sex. I mean, your clitoris has the most nerve endings of any place in any body, male or female. Like, hello, that's there to be used and enjoyed. So anyway, I think what's happening now is people are realizing that, like, whatever type of orgasm you have is okay. And whatever you want to do to get to that orgasm, it's okay. You should not feel ashamed. And that's why we kind of have had to change that narrative. And it's great that it's happening.
Yeah, because many women do feel ashamed if they don't orgasm easily. They feel they've let their partner down. They have to. How many people fake it? Just so that their partner doesn't feel let down.
Yeah, don't do that, people. I mean, for me, again, sex positive means you should be able to tell your partner, hey, this isn't working. Can we try something else? That pressure to deliver on both giving and receiving orgasms is taking the joy out of sex, because sex is not about the end result. This isn't like some Protestant work ethic stuff, guys. Like, it's not supposed to be, it's a journey. It's supposed to be pleasurable and enjoyable and a shared, intimate experience. And reframing it in your mind and in the dialogue with your partner is important.
Absolutely. What advice, what solutions do you offer to help people build a sex-positive relationship?
I talk some about this in the book. I think there are a couple of things that we have to do if we want sex-positive relationships. And the number one thing is truly knowing what you want first. So many of us jump into these relationships and we haven't really even connected with our own intentions, our own energy, our own desires. And so we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, so to speak. But you really have to know who you are and what kind of relationship do you want. Like, do you want a casual relationship? Do you want a polyamorous relationship? Do you want a relationship where you can start experiencing tantric sex? Really connect with what you want. How do you want to feel? A lot of millennials want this Jay-Z, Beyonce relationship, power couple thing, and that's kind of been thrust into us as the norm, which is super unattainable. And you have to know really if that's what you want, really being realistic with your expectations about it. And then, I have a couple other steps too, if I have time for them.
Sure, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Once you decide what kind of relationship you want, you have to actively get out there and find your tribe. It's not enough to sit at home online and talk to people. You have to go and face-to-face with people. You might actually fall in love, but you have to get out there. And I say that because we need to feel that spark, that connection, that body language. Even if you do things online like video games or anime, you can still go to gatherings of people in the physical flesh who like them and connect. And it's not that hard to find. Just go online, you can find it.
I think that's a really important point to make, because in this digital age where we are seeing less, connection face-to-face and more remote connection, we are in danger of really, I think, damaging something important within us.
I completely agree. That's why we can't ever forget that to find love and to be sex positive, we really do have to push ourselves out of our comfort zones and connect with people face to face and communicate with them about what we want. Again, that's how you start the relationship. That way you're not 5 years in and you're faking your orgasms and you're terrified that if you say something, your partner's going to freak out because you weren't communicating from the start.
What about people who are older and maybe single, divorced, getting out into the dating scene again, which is a whole different ball game than it was 20, 30 years ago, and are still carrying some of that conditioning. What advice would you offer them?
My advice would be to stop apologizing for who you are. stop apologizing. It might feel like you don't fit in. It might feel like no one understands you. It might feel like you're out of touch. It doesn't matter. You are who you are. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Own it. Don't apologize. Just be who you are going to be. I think that everyone could benefit from that advice, but especially when you feel like you're out of touch with things.
Mm-hmm. Good advice. Dr. Kelly Neff, we're almost out of time now. I know the book launches on February the 1st, and you'll be at the Conscious Life Expo in LA, which starts on February the 8th. What else are you doing?
Oh my gosh, I have a bunch of fun things planned. I am doing a talk at Caveat in New York, in Manhattan, I believe on the Lower East Side. It is called Let's Talk About Sex and Your Ex. And it's right in time for Valentine's Day on February 11th, 2020. I'm going to be doing a whole workshop kind of helping people break down those patterns that led them into relationships that didn't work and kind of explore what they do want for their relationship. So very, very much sex positive. And we're going to talk about a lot of weird stuff from the book. And then I have a couple other dates in Manhattan. Check back with me closer to the day. I will have all of this on my website, which is sexpositivebook.com. You can find my blog, tour dates, links to order the book. You can pre-order it on Amazon right now. And I will be coming to London as well. We're just still locking down some dates.
Oh, well, let me know when you do. And in the meantime, I would say to you, check back in with me in 2 or 3, 4 years' time. And let's see, because everything is moving so rapidly these days, I'm really fascinated to see the next steps that unfold in this direction.
Me too. Let's see what happens, right?
Yeah.
I think it's exciting.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly Neff, for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you so much.
Sex Positive, Redefining Our Attitudes to Love and Sex is published by Watkins. For more information about Dr. Kelly Neff's book and work, visit her 2 websites, sexpositivebook.com, and do check out thelucidplanet.com, where she has her radio show. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to being with you at the same time next week. It's goodbye from me.
Bye.